So, I have been a part of the comic collector space for the last decade, and just the overall collector space for even longer than that, and you start to see trends, you see certain things become kind of the hot item of the year, and there was a little while where comic books had actually become kind of the hot collector's item that everyone was flocking to, and that would be around 2021. Oddly enough, that was actually a period of time that I was away from the whole collecting space. I was not really buying or collecting anything during that point. 2021 became known as the comic book boom, and sales were just going through the roof. 2020 was already up from previous years at 1.28 billion, and in 2021 it rose to over $2 billion worth of estimated sales in comic books. And that was absolutely insane. The market has never seen a shift like that, and it's no doubt that people having time at home, extra money to spend on hobbies, and a rising interest in the MCU. After Avengers Endgame, a lot of people were speculating on the future of the MCU, but little did they know the future would be overall declining interest, and it seems like the comic book market kind of led in that direction a little bit, with sales starting to decline in 2023. So what happened to cause this massive spike, and why are we now seeing a bit of a decline? Well, one big thing that we kind of got into before is there's been a decline in interest of comic book movies, and that was what kind of brought in a lot more casual people, and so there were a lot of people who joined the hobby around this time when we see this massive spike that were not necessarily in it because they love the comic books. There were a lot of people who were speculators and who just kind of were chasing the trend, and now we see a lot of those people kind of pivoting away from comic books now that those sales are not as consistent. Something else that started to rise around this time was the comic book influencer. So when I was starting to get into comic books back in like 2015, there wasn't really much of a YouTube comic book scene. There were channels like Comicstorian, and he actually did a bit of a different format of show back then. So there were channels like that, and there were channels that were kind of doing what I do, where I sort of just show my collection and go out to the shop. So that was kind of more what YouTube was. And in 2021, you really started to see the rise of the comic influencer, the whatnot influencer, the speculator shows. And maybe these shows existed back then, but not to the scale that they did in 2021. And they were probably more for people that had more money to buy some of these more high-end books. And that was a problem, is that you had a lot of people with a lot of disposable income and a lot of free time on their hands, and they just wound up with a bunch of books that they didn't care about. And so some people felt burnt on the comic book hobby. Some people who just were not really here for comics in the first place have pivoted to things like Pokemon cards. Like I said before, we see a lot of trends, and right now the market is moving to the trading cards. You have things like the Spider-Man, Magic the Gathering. That's probably selling better than Spider-Man's own comic book at the moment. And you know, you will always have those blue chip key books, the ones that will always be valuable. But a lot of the smaller keys, a lot of stuff after the golden age, once you get into like the silver age, the vintage market for comic books just is not what it was in 2021. It seems like there is a new wave of collectors, and I do want to get a little bit into what I think the 2025 and future of comic book collecting is going to look like, but I think that a lot of people, they dove into the vintage market really heavy on Silver Age books. And a lot of these Silver Age books just did not hold the value unless if you have like really, really high grade stuff. Even then, if we're talking Golden Age comics from characters like Superman or Batman, we can expect those prices to stay kind of high. And even Marvel stuff from the Silver Age. Marvel books from the Silver Age are going to be more popular than DC books from the Silver Age, and that's something that's just always going to be that way. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of DC's really popular characters came around in the Golden Age, and for Marvel, a lot of their popular characters like Spider-Man and the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, a lot of those books came from the Silver Age. So these characters that have legacies, their books are still going to have value, but a lot of people were just heavy into MCU speculation and hoping to find the next big character. And I think the funniest and probably the one that really kind of burst the bubble on a lot of this MCU speculation was the hilarious Dazzler spec. You missed it. When Deadpool and Wolverine was announced, there was this hilarious thing where people were speccing hardcore that Taylor Swift was going to be in the movie and that she was going to play Dazzler, and then it changed to Lady Deadpool. Even after it was confirmed that she wasn't going to be in the movie, people were not letting up, and that one just got ridiculous. So people were buying up her first appearance in Uncanny X-Men number 130. I mean, that's a Bronze Age book. We're talking 1980s. A lot of those still do exist in nice condition, and the fact that it became this huge FOMO spec book over nothing, over just silly rumors and memes. So I think that things were already on their way down, but that just became such big news for a while, and it was so silly. I think that turned away a lot of the people who were just kind of casually speculating on this stuff. And I mean, Deadpool and Wolverine, I thought was a pretty decent movie. And there were a lot of sales of Hulk 181, Wolverine's first appearance, and New Mutants 98, Deadpool's first appearance. And those sales seem to have also cooled down quite a bit as well. It seems to me like the vintage market and speculating on movies is just not what the current market for comics is interested in. And what I think the current market for comic books is, I think in the year of 2025, we have seen a shift in how people are buying comic books. And it makes me really happy, actually, to see. And it's a reason why I'm really glad I missed the comic boom. So I talked a little bit at the start about how I got into comic books a decade ago in 2015, and at that time I was a graphic novel collector, a trade paperback hardcover collector, and I kind of fell out of it for a little while. I would pick things up here and there to read, but I was not keeping up as much with new stuff. And that kind of shifted around 2023. I got back hardcore into reading comic books, and I started picking up single issues because I just wanted more to read, and there were some books that were not collected. So that was really what started my single issue vintage comic collecting, was just wanting to read more than was available in collected editions. And what I'm seeing right now in the current comic book market is a new influx of readers and people who actually care about the stories. And the sales that I'm seeing go kind of crazy right now are new books that people are buying up just because they liked the story and they wanted to read it. Like something like Absolute Batman. Sales for Absolute Batman, first printing on the secondary market, are going crazy. I've been seeing them close to $100, $100 for just a standard cover A. And this is also something I talked about a little bit in my video, why I don't collect graded comics, and I talked about how I think the future is going to be in people collecting cover A's. And to me, that seems to be the trend. I'm noticing that whenever there's kind of a hot book, people are grabbing up the cover A's. Like, the variant covers are fun, and they may give a little bit of an artificial boost to the comic sales, but what's really driving comic sales right now and getting people in the comic shop, getting people excited, are good stories and graphic novels, trade paperbacks, hardcovers, but really what I think is changing the game are these new compact comics that DC is putting out. People seem to really love these things. Graphic novel sales have definitely been growing for years as opposed to the single issue market, but they're still trailing behind manga a little bit, and a lot of that for people has to do with just the convenience of manga and the prices being a little cheaper. These DC compact comics are like $9.99 as opposed to like $20, $15 to $20, depending on the size of the collected edition. If it's a hardcover deluxe, even more than that. So for a long time, a lot of people have felt kind of priced out of collecting and reading comic books. They've already put out so many great stories that will be perfect for getting people into comic books. And that's something that I think started at the end of last year. Something else that started at the end of last year was the DC Absolute Universe. Like I mentioned before, that's something that has been getting a lot of new people excited. There's been a lot of buzz about it online, and even just recently. We're a year into Absolute Batman, and the price of that issue #1 keeps going up. A lot of the times with these hot comics, we'll see maybe a temporary spike and then a correction. This one has just been trending up, and particularly recently, there's been a lot of buzz on social media about some of the things that are going on. The Absolute Batman Annual was a big hit, and that's one I was not even able to find a cover A for. That one is one of those books that people bought up all the cover A's for. And of course Marvel has their Ultimate Universe, although that's coming to an end. Seems like the Absolute and the Ultimate Universes are really doing a lot to bring in new people who might be overwhelmed by all the history that you're expected to know for reading comic books. At least from the outside looking in, it can be kind of overwhelming. So to have these kind of fresh takes, I think it's really been resonating with a lot of people, particularly Absolute Batman, I think has really been resonating with a lot of people. So I think DC particularly has been making a lot of good moves, and I think that is just going to be the future. We might not have the same sales that we did in 2021 and 2022, but honestly, I'm glad about that. I'm okay about that because that exposure that the comic hobby got during that time, it did enough to bring in more people, and the ones who really care about comics stuck around and will continue to share this stuff with other people. And so yeah, we might not reach the heights ever again of 2021, 2022, but I am glad about that. I'm okay with that because right now the people that are left are people that really care about these comics and really respect the stories and want to see the new stuff coming out right now. Of course, I love vintage comics. I love my Silver Age. I love my Bronze Age. And I have nothing against comic dealers and people who started maybe selling comics during the boom. I think that the ones who are still around selling today that started during the boom, those are the ones who really care. The ones who were able to adapt to the changing market and accept that they're not getting the same prices now as they got in 2021, those are the ones who are really here because they love the hobby. A lot of other people, like I said, have shifted to other collectibles. The ones who are still here in terms of both the sellers and the buyers, I think are the ones who really, really care about this stuff, and I think that gives me a lot of hope for the future. So I'm glad I missed the comic boom. If I were paying attention during that time, do I think I would have maybe bought into some stupid stuff? No, I don't think so, because my reason for buying the single issues, the back issues, the floppy comics, is just because I like reading the stories. I'm not somebody who needs to have everything in high grade. I'm not somebody who needs to have every single key book. I'm somebody that I want to curate my collection my way. And during 2020, 2021, 2022, I had comics. I would buy comics here and there, but they were always trade paperbacks, graphic novels, hardcovers, and a lot of them I bought secondhand. I would go to used bookstores. Some I would order from like Amazon or online retailers. I still did know about some of the new comics that were coming out, but I was not at all paying attention to any of those speculator shows, and I don't think I would have. I've always just been more into seeing other people's collections. That's what finally got me to start collecting comics myself, was just kind of going on YouTube and seeing other people's collections. That's the type of content I've always gravitated to. I have never really cared so much about sales and about the numbers game of all of it. I just like to look for a good deal. And that's still what I do. What I like to do with this channel is just show people that you can find cool stuff for a good deal, that the comic book hobby is not this unattainable thing, and you can enjoy the stories and the history of it and not have to ruin your life like some people did in 2021 and 2022. So that's another reason why I'm glad that we're done, and I'm glad that the people who are here are the ones that really care. Yeah, I feel good, and it makes me feel good to be a part of this new generation and to have a YouTube channel and be able to guide people in the new wave of comic book collecting. Like I said, this isn't like a comprehensive dive into the comic boom because I was not around for it. I know that there were a lot of sales that went crazy. There was some crazy sale of an Amazing Fantasy 15, a first Spider-Man, and that got a lot of news coverage and maybe kind of attracted some of the wrong people to the hobby. So that's all I really have to say about it. You know what? I love my comics and I love getting them for a good price. So let's not go back to that, alright? Anyways, thanks for watching.